Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tarbert for my second online poetry reading based on the theme There Will Be Time. Today is, of course, Poetry Day Ireland, organised by Poetry Ireland, and normally there would be events up and down the country to mark the occasion. And today this is all gone online, like you're hearing now. So sit back and enjoy it, and thank you for taking the time out to come back again. I'd also like to acknowledge your patience last week as we overcame some of the technical issues, and thank you for listening again last week and for your lovely comments and feedback on our first attempt into the online poetry. We are now on day 49 of COVID since the schools closed, and just in fact over 2 months since the first person tested positive on the 29th of January. I hope you're all doing well and safe and well. I know it's a difficult enough time for most of us, but I think there's great resilience around, and people are battling on at every level. I have to acknowledge that a very close friend of mine lost his mother yesterday to COVID, and I'm sending my deepest condolences on such a huge loss in these very challenging times. Today is the 30th of April, and of course, as I said, is Poetry Day Ireland, and normally there would be a host of events. However, this year Poetry Ireland themselves suffered a great loss, as indeed the whole general public, in that the iconic figure Ivan Boland passed away suddenly on Monday last. And Ivan was not just a creative writing genius, but also a leader in academia, an iconic figure in every way, and her thought leadership in this country stands out. We'll remember her later when I read one of her poems, but for me, her courage in standing up and talking out against inequality and injustice in our society is really my lasting memory of Ivan. Yeshte Gorev Hanimika Dilish. As I said, welcome to my back garden this week as against the house, as I said last week. Just a little bit of the history about the garden itself. First of all, behind me, or not behind me, in front of me actually, is one of the landmarks of the garden itself. It's a beautiful old beech tree, which historians tell me is much older than the house itself. In fact, over 300 years old, and was there and has been there since long before the house itself was built. Right on my right hand side is probably something that I find really special, in that it's what remains of a Tarbert village long before any house at all was set in Main Street where I live. This date back, these little stone houses, which I'm trying to renovate myself and take the ivy off slowly, were there from the 1700s, and according to a very trusted historical source, there are in fact drawings done by the engraver Thomas Milton of this village, again around that time. He has a collection of selected views of Ireland based on the drawings from some of the best artists of that era. I checked it yesterday, and I noticed Tarbert was mentioned again, and it was based on work done by the artist F. Wheatley in 1793. I often wondered myself here if the tree, and indeed the village and the walls and the old walls could talk, and if they had ears, they would have some stories and some inspirational pieces for us to write about. However, as I said just before I go on now to read the poems, I'm reading again 5 today. I have to mention that all my writings and all my publications and anything I do is in aid of the Rice Foundation, which was set up in 2009 by Senator Frances Black, herself a lifelong campaigner in breaking the cycle of addiction in Ireland. So there, if you want to find out more about the Rice Foundation, you'll get them on www.thericefoundation.ie. So now for the poetry. The first poem is written by Yvonne Boland, and I want to dedicate this to her memory. But first of all, I want to read you probably the nice tribute that was paid to her by Poetry Ireland. So I'm going to read you that. I think it certainly says an awful lot more about Yvonne than I ever could. So this was released on Monday last, April the 27th. Everyone in Poetry Ireland is devastated to learn of the sudden death of Yvonne Boland. We treasure our connection with her. As editor of Poetry Ireland Review for the last 3 years, she was unfailingly generous with her time and always astute and inclusive in the choices she made. The cover letter of each submission was read with such appreciation as were the poems, for people interested her just as much as the poetry. The journey of the poet makes to put pen to paper, to send a set of poems for her consideration. This was as important to her as any poetic reputation. So her issues of the journal were always wonderfully democratic, the award-winning poet and the unheralded poet side by side. All of us in Poetry Ireland admire her energy and her clear thinking, and we hugely valued the world that she opened up for us. She was funny and warm and delightfully no-nonsense. We are thinking of her family so much at this time, of whom she was so proud. For me personally, I in terms of her poetry, there are some, and I see that 2 of them have made into this lovely, beautiful presentation of the 1,000 best ever Irish poems. One of them being Misha Era, which was a real battle cry for women against the inequality. I hope to God we've moved on from that. And of course, her very famous and iconic piece called Night Feed. By the way, tomorrow Van will be buried after a private service, and the poet Theo Dorgan, a great friend of hers, has, I see, asked today that those of us who knew her or who enjoyed her poetry would light a candle at 11:30 tomorrow, Friday. The poem I'm going to read is a lovely poem about Dublin. It's called Gifts of the River by Yvonne Boland from A Poet's Dublin. Again, you can actually get a lot of Yvonne's stuff if you go to www.apoetsdublin.wordpress.com. That's www.apoetsdublin.wordpress.com. So, Gifts of the River. I begin with the Liffey because a river is not a place. It is a maker of places. Without the river, there would be no city. Every day, turning its narrow circle, endlessly absorbing and reabsorbing the shapes and reflections of the city, it mirrors what it created. With the river, the city every day has to throw itself again into those surfaces, those depths, those reflections which have served as the source of all its fictions. So that's the poem by Yvonne Boland. Now I'm going to move to my second poem. I think I mentioned we're going to read 5 poems altogether from various different poets. The next one was sent to me during the week. I hadn't seen it before. It came from, the title is Fear, and it's written by Khalil Gibran, a gifted Lebanese poet, writer and visual artist of the late 1800s and early 1900s. His best known poetry work is entitled, the book is entitled The Prophet. I suppose to talk a little bit about fear, particularly in the times that we're in. Now, not for a moment do I believe that life is meant to be lived without any fear. In fact, a healthy respect for this emotion keeps us all alive and well. Equally, the fear emotion isn't a failure, but for me at least, it is a very complex emotion. As I become older, and not necessarily any wiser, life becomes more about awareness and our conscious relationship with ourselves, each other, and what we stir in each other. Stephanie Parks sent me this poem after last week's reading. Stephanie is a frontline nurse in the A&E department in Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Drogheda. I worked with Stephanie as part of a healthcare team in County Louth some years ago. I'm reading this for Stephanie and indeed for all the frontline healthcare workers whose bravery in the middle of this pandemic is so inspiring. Fear by Khalil Gibran. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has travelled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. Beautiful, beautiful poem. I have to say the image it conjured up in me was that if you ever happen to do the Loophead Drive and get up to the top of Loophead Lighthouse, you'll capture the River Shannon at its magnificent best, absolutely flown into the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful, beautiful sight. Thank you, Stephanie, for that poem. The next poem is for family, mine, yours, families of all shapes, sizes, ages, those living with new closeness because of COVID, and also mindful of people who are suffering either mentally, physically, emotionally and spiritually as a result of COVID. It's a beautiful poem by John O'Donoghue. It's from his book, A Book of Blessings, and it's to bless the space between us. This was sent to me by my sister Helen, locked down in London just last week. Blessings. This is the time to be slow, lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginning. Now come to probably one of my favourite poems, and I think based on the theme we talked about earlier, that came with There Will Be Time. This poem, to me, captures that. Wonderful poem by Seamus Heaney called Postscript. Many people will be aware of it. Yeah, and it has everything for me anyway. It's And it really captures this theme exceptionally well. The background to the poem itself, of course, is that Seamus Heaney, along with his friend and playwright Brian Friel, left Galway with their two wives, Mary Heaney and Anne Friel, to take a drive out from Galway to County Clare. He was asked once by, I think it was Dennis O'Driscoll, who wrote the biography for him, about this poem. And he talked about how sometimes poems come to people in an instant. And this was one of these. And he said, he compared it to, he said, now and again a poem comes like that, like a ball kicked in from nowhere. I'd especially like to read this poem for people who've had birthdays. My friend and good friend in Belfast, Louise Matthews, had a birthday on the 25th of April. And two good friends of mine have birthdays today, and thanks to Facebook for reminding me of all that. Michael Holly from Tarbert in New York, and Ger Lowe from Listowel. So, postscript by Seamus Heaney. And sometime make the time to drive out west into County Clare, along the flaggy shore in September or October, when the wind and the light are working off each other, so that the ocean on one side is wild with foam and glitter, and inland among stones the surface of a slate-grey lake is lit by the earthed lightning of a flock of swans. Their feathers ruffed and ruffling, white on white, their fully grown headstrong-looking heads tucked or cresting or busy underwater. Useless to think you'll park or capture it more thoroughly. You are neither here nor there. A hurry through known and strange things pass. As big soft buffetings come at the car sideways and catch the heart off guard and blow it open. Beautiful, beautiful piece. And by the way, County Clare can be seen from just over my shoulder here, even though that part I think is much more North Clare. My final poem this evening is a poem by an American author, Mary Jane Oliver, a wonderful and famous indeed American poet, who has won the National Book Award and indeed the Pulitzer Prize. And in 2007, the New York Times described her as by far and away the country's best-selling poet. She was born in Ohio on the 10th of September 1935 and died relatively recently in January 2019 in Florida. A great friend of mine, Liam O'Murhilla from County Cork, introduced me to this beautiful poem one night as both of us shared the platform and read poetry in County Louth. Sadly too, Liam passed away way too soon in May 2014. He was extremely encouraging to me when I started to write poetry. I'd like to remember him when I read this. I'm also reading it for anybody who is particularly struggling under the weight of the current circumstances, particularly those who are finding it hard for whatever reason. It's called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So that's the end of our readings for today. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I enjoyed reading them out loud here in my garden in County Kerry. We do regret that for now many of you are locked out of our county, as we are locked out of yours and where you live. But there will be a time when all that will change, and we will welcome you back with open hearts and open arms. There will definitely be that time. So again, thank you for taking the time to listen. We plan to be back again next Thursday, same time, same place. And for the moment, slán.